Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome to Breaking Points. Emily, good morning.
Good morning. Also, if people didn't watch the Friday show, they should go check out Sagar's baby.
Little bit of news. Yeah, congratulations to Sagar, proud father of a baby girl.
And there are pictures. So if you go to Sagar's Instagram, you can see the pictures.
Yeah, which I tried to pull up and failed on Friday. But in any case, you can go check those out for yourself. Priya June, which I think is a really beautiful name.
So cute, too. Tiny, adorable.
Adorable. Lots of hair.
Lots of hair.
Yeah.
So we're just so happy for them.
Yes, indeed. Meanwhile, you were suffering through our air traffic nightmarish landscape here over the weekend.
Yeah, so my grandparents' 70th anniversary was this weekend in Wisconsin.
Wow.
70th anniversary.
Unbelievable.
So that 1955, I think.
Wow, congrats to them. That's, God bless. That's amazing.
Yeah, so we were really excited to go, but the Reagan Airport was a complete mess on Friday. There was a storm that rolled through. The entire terminal basically had cancellations and delays. So we were at the airport for 7 hours until like 3 a.m. early Saturday. So the reason I say that is if you have Memorial Day travel coming up, just be aware that our air traffic system, I mean, everyone is already kind of aware of this, but I think, honestly, the problems at Newark are still, that's a problem that creates tangles throughout the entire country. True. It's such a big hub. So things are really rough.
Well, and Newark has gotten a lot of the attention because they had those catastrophic failures where they actively lost radar and were just completely blind. But the shortage in air traffic controllers that's nationwide. It's a massive issue.
Yes, and they blamed actually one of the American Air gate agents when she was making announcements. She was like, we just haven't had enough air traffic controllers. And that was at Reagan National. So I'm sure that's happening in other parts of the country too.
Wow.
Be careful if you have Memorial Day travel. It's rough out there.
Yeah, plan to be in for the long haul,
Seriously.
I guess, as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Lot to get to in the show this morning. So there are some major developments out of Gaza amidst a completely apocalyptic ground invasion from Israel. They have agreed to let in some minimal amount of aid. So we'll break all of that. There's a lot of moving pieces going on in the region right there. And we also wanted to highlight for you, Theo Vaughn came out and, said he made some comments, very heartfelt about how he felt that he hadn't said enough about what he's describing as a genocide in Gaza, which I think is, to me, undeniable at this point. So wanted to take a look at that and the way that public opinion in the U.S. overall has shifted with regard to Israel and Palestine. President Biden, former President Biden, diagnosed with a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. We actually have a Biden insider who had already been booked to be on the show, Michael LaRosa. We've had him on before. He was Dr. Jill Biden's press secretary. And so he's been talking about, what he saw inside of that world and trying to be candid about that. So, interested to hear his reaction to this cancer diagnosis. And look, just to be frank, the timing of it raises a lot of eyebrows, especially the fact that it is so advanced. And this would be someone who would be seen medically, would have been in the White House seeing the White House doctors and certainly would be subsequent to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have a lot of doctors were weighing in after the diagnosis. And some, I think we have some information from a Yale professor who's a doctor. Like, we're not talking cranks who are weighing in on the diagnosis of Biden and the timing of the diagnosis, or at least the announcement of the diagnosis. So there's a lot to get to with that. Krystal, Friday, Moody's agreed with the other analysts and finally downgraded the rating of the United States.
Yeah, and I think the markets are down this morning because of it. So there's a lot there. There's some new comments from Trump and Secretary Bessent with regard to Walmart saying they're going to raise prices. Trump says Walmart should eat the tariffs. So we'll see if they oblige. We also have our eyes on a horrific system of tornadoes that hit the Midwest, Kentucky and Missouri in particular. I think 26 people dead after that. And questions about whether or not DOGE may have impacted their ability to, alert people in the area rapidly enough. So we'll dig into all of that. And we're also going to have Arjun Singh of Lever News join us to talk about the history of the anti-tax movement, which is always relevant, but is particularly relevant right now as Republicans are trying to get this reconciliation bill passed. They just passed it on a committee actually late last night, and obviously includes a giant tax cut for the rich again, even though public opinion has really turned on the concept of this sort of like overall trickle-down concept. there are huge majorities in both parties, and certainly with independents as well, at this point for raising taxes on the rich. So in any case, he's going to dig into the backstory of how we got to this moment.
Yeah, we've got some fun clips and history to go through. It'll be a really interesting segment, so stay tuned for that. Krystal, we'll be doing an AMA, that's right, as well.
Yes.
BreakingPoints.com, by the way, to get that subscription. If you can't get the subscription, we totally understand. Just make sure to subscribe on YouTube, leave comments, like the videos. It helps us.
Yeah, helps us a lot. So thank you guys for all your support that you've shown. And if you want to be part of that AMA Live, which we try to do every Monday or Tuesday, depending on how long the Monday show goes to go, but we got it on the schedule this week for Monday. Make sure you do that. And one more announcement before we jump into what is going on in Gaza. Dave Smith is going to join me tomorrow as co-host.
Excited.
So that should be fun. I already got a bunch of topics. You know, we'll dig into the latest on, you know, Ukraine. There's movement that I want to hear from him on. I actually want to get his take on this Epstein thing with both Bongino and Kash Patel being like, yeah, he killed himself. There's really nothing to see here.
Bongino said yesterday, like, I've seen the file. I saw
the whole file.
I know what a suicide looks like.
The other one he said is that there's no there in terms of any, like, Trump assassination conspiracies as well.
Which is also absurd to think. I mean, the stuff going on with that assassination, Secret Service, it's really something if that's where they're landing.
Nothing to see here.
Less than a year after
Nothing to see here.
Yeah.
So, in any case, it should be fun, so I'm looking forward to that. All right, let's get into some news that is quite grim, quite dire at this point. Let's go ahead and put A8 up on the screen here, guys. Israel has agreed to introduce what they're describing as a basic amount of food into Gaza in order to prevent famine, framing it as necessary to sustain the expansion of intense fighting to defeat Hamas. They have the full statement here from Bibi Netanyahu's office. This is from DropSite. They say, on the recommendation of the IDF and out of the operational need to enable the expansion of the intense fighting to defeat Hamas, Israel will introduce a basic amount of food to the population in order to ensure that a famine crisis does not develop in the Gaza Strip. Such a crisis would jeopardize the continuation of the Gideon Chariots operation to defeat Hamas. That is the new apocalyptic ground invasion that they are conducting. Israel will work to deny Hamas's ability to take control of the distribution of humanitarian aid to ensure that the aid does not reach Hamas terrorists. I also have Jeremy Scahill of DropSite News, of course, tweeted, Netanyahu said Israel will allow some aid into Gaza because controversy over his starvation campaign is hindering implementation of his final solution. Quote, we're going to take control of all the Gaza Strip, and to do this, we need to do it in a way that they won't stop us. Smotrich endorsed Netanyahu's temporary aid gimmick, saying it will allow the U.S. and other Israel allies to continue to provide us with an international umbrella of protection against the Security Council and the Hague Tribunal, and for us to continue to fight until victory. So, Emily, it sounds like they realized that the world was not maybe gonna just stand by and let them, before all of our eyes, starve somewhere around 2 million people left in the Gaza Strip. They also, and I'll show you some of these images later, they are starting to face some significant internal, domestic pushback as well. There was a march to the border fence there with Gaza and attempts actually to cross that were, of course, rebuffed by the Israeli police. But they were under enough pressure to feel like, okay, we at least need to allow some token amount of food in. It's been over 2 months since any food, water, medicine has entered the Strip. And we know that there have been children who are severely malnourished and some who have died as a result of this starvation policy.
Well, and just to, make this visual for everyone, we can go ahead and start rolling A2. This is a mashup of some footage of what we're seeing from the Strip.
So this was kids who were playing in the street in Gaza, and an Israeli drone struck them. You can see here, obviously wounded, being carried. These are, fires amidst the bombing and just chaos that you can see unfolding here. Tents that caught fire. Here they're attempting to rescue someone from out underneath the rubble. They haven't been allowed to have any heavy equipment in, so it's just all done by hand. Here is the destruction of an entire neighborhood. I believe this is in or near Rafah, a severely injured child that you see here with head and other wounds. People who are once again trying to, looks like, carry their belongings, being forcibly displaced once again. And here's an overall view that you can see of the rubble and the destruction as people go ahead and, try to flee to wherever may be safe.
Krystal, last week we were covering the internal conversation. We talked to Jeremy Scahill about this, but in Israel, about whether or not U.S. aid, and this is from the far right in Israel, whether or not U.S. aid hampers them ultimately, if it's ultimately something that holds back their efforts to prosecute the war in the way that they would want to. And that's an interesting context, that as the famine was worsening and as they wanted to continue to go back in, we saw them saying, well, maybe without the U.S., without the money from the United States, without the resources from the United States, we wouldn't even have to have these conversations. We could just do whatever we wanted. And, what we saw just in the last 24 hours, at least on the aid side, is that the pressure was successful for now. But this is Steve Witkoff. Right now, he's saying that he's not forcing Israel to end the war, according to officials. Krystal, that's where I'm most curious about what's happened over the weekend in particular. We still don't have a ton of information. The Barak Ravid report on aid in Axios suggests that U.S. pressure was instrumental in getting the humanitarian aid back into Gaza, but we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but we have indications, like from Steve Witkoff, that they're not being as, let's say, privately intense as they at one point suggested that they would be.
Well, and we should be clear about what this aid really entails. Israel had gone to a number of humanitarian aid organizations with this plan of how they wanted to distribute aid, and they all effectively said no. This would be unconscionable. It would violate our principles. You're putting civilians at risk. You're using food as a weapon of war. Even in the language that Bibi uses here, he describes it as a basic amount of food. So basically, we'll give you enough so that hopefully we don't have full-blown famine and people starving to death, because we don't think the world would just sit by and watch that potentially. Mm-hmm. And maybe our own population even would not, some portion of it would not sit back and watch that. But, aid organizations rejected this as an outrageous way of going about things. There's also some scheme that's been cooked up with U.S. Non-governmental organizations involving effectively U.S. mercenaries who are already arriving in Israel to be involved in this aid distribution, this basic amount of aid distribution. They did not take a vote in the Security Cabinet because the expectation is that vote to allow in even this bare minimum of food would have failed. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have been opposed to it. But again, their justification is if we want to finish the job in Gaza, then apparently we're going to have to allow in some amount of food. So that is the context in which this is happening. We have some recent comments from Trump as well about whether or not he's frustrated with Netanyahu, and also once again reiterating his commitment to a full ethnic cleansing plan. This was in an interview with Brett Baird. Let's go ahead and take a listen to those comments.
Obviously, the Israel-Hamas and what's happening in Gaza is driving a lot. How do you see that? Are you frustrated at all with Prime Minister Netanyahu?
No, look, he's got a tough situation. You have to remember there was an October 7th that everyone forgets. It was one of the most violent days in the history of the world, not the Middle East, the world, when you look at the tapes. And the tapes are there for everyone to see. So he has that problem. That problem should have never happened. Now, if I were president, that problem wouldn't have happened because Iran had no money. They were stone cold broke, and they weren't giving money to Hamas.
The situation in Gaza is going to come to an end soon?
Gaza's a nasty place. It's been that way for years. I think it should become a free zone. Freedom. I call it a freedom zone. It should become a freedom zone. It doesn't work. Every 10 years they go back. They have Hamas. Everybody's being killed all over the place. I mean, you ever see? You talk about crime stats. It's a nasty place.
Are these people, these countries that you were just visiting, are they going to have to be a part of the solution?
Well, they would be. They would be. I spoke to all three of them. They would absolutely be. I mean, they're really rich and really, really, really even more than rich. They're good people, and they would help. And so money's not even the problem.
You got to get countries to say yes, to take them.
Look, these are people that want to be in the Middle East. They really want to be in the Middle East. They love the Middle East. I see that. There's a spirit for the Middle East. They didn't have to go to Sweden, Germany, these different countries. They could have been home in the Middle East if somebody had the brains to build beautiful communities. 1.9 million is a lot of people, but it's not a lot of people.
He says they could be home in the Middle East. I'm sure Palestinians will tell you their home is in Palestine. In any case, there were reports as well about a plan to potentially ethnically cleanse Palestinians to Libya. We can put A4 up on the screen. After the report was published, then they put out a denial saying this is untrue, but NBC News had given them a chance to comment. They didn't say anything. The Trump administration, NBC News says, is working on a plan to permanently relocate up to 1 million Palestinians from the Gaza Strip to Libya. 5 people with knowledge told NBC News the plan's under serious enough consideration. The administration has discussed it with Libya's leadership. Don't say which factions of Libya's leadership, because Libya is basically, torn asunder thanks to our own foreign policy. In any case, they say in exchange for the resettling of Palestinians, the administration would potentially release to Libya billions of dollars in funds that the U.S. froze more than a decade ago, those 3 people said. So, apparently there have been some conversations there. In addition, Trump, has consistently reiterated that this is his ultimate goal. And one other note on his comments there, Emily, that I just think is, worth considering. He claims in that clip we just played that there are 1.9 million people in Gaza. That would indicate that, some hundreds of thousands of people have been killed since, post-October 7th. The original estimate prior to October 7th was 2.2 to 2.3 million people. So, drop site pointing out that means if his numbers are correct, and he said similar things before too, by the way, that this campaign's already reduced the Palestinian population in Gaza by about 15%.
Oh my gosh. Well, speaking of the Trump administration, A6, this is a drop site report noticing as, well, so we'll put this in the context of what we were just talking about with Steve Witkoff. This is the drop site report saying that, and this is from Jeremy, Steve Witkoff personally promised to lift the Gaza blockade in exchange for Adon Alexander. And so it is now May 19th. And what we've seen, as we mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, is indications to the contrary from Steve Witkoff that he's acting contrary to what Jeremy's reporting suggests he said that he was going to do. And Krystal, with the humanitarian aid plan that you just laid out, this is, for Witkoff, this is looking extremely bad. I mean, Trump projects so much of his hopes onto Steve Witkoff to get an end to this conflict, but to the point where, you're telling one side of these negotiations, which is Hamas, that you're going to do something, you don't do it, and they just give up a huge piece of leverage for that. Probably doesn't help your ability to continue negotiating in a way that's helpful to securing an end to the conflict.
Right, there or anywhere else.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're Iran and you're looking at, Witkoff just told them, okay, you release this American-Israeli hostage and we will then, we'll secure this aid relief. We're going to work and press for an end to the war. We're going to give you public credit. And there were a series of promises that were made. And then you just don't do it. How do you think that, the Russians and the Ukrainians are going to look at that? How do you think that the Iranians are going to look at that? How do you think that Hamas is going to look at that going forward, if you do want to seek an end to this conflict? So it's a huge deal in terms of his credibility when, as you put it, Emily, he has been put so central to all of these key high-stakes negotiations. We'll cover with Dave Smith tomorrow. There's supposed to be a Trump-Putin phone call coming up in an attempt to, to end that war. So in any case, not only did he just get this, and the possible trajectory here, one possible reading of what the Trump administration has done here, and Michael Tracy said the same thing on his Twitter, is basically they got the last American and then they can just not really care anymore about what Bibi does going forward. And I think that's a real possibility of what we're seeing unfold, and especially when, again, everyone wants to, what does Trump really want? And what's he really thinking? He's told us multiple times what he really wants and what he's really thinking. He wants this freedom zone, ethnic cleansing, beach development plan. That's what he wants. Now, will he be able to achieve that? That's kind of the only question. But to me, it's not really an open question anymore what Trump wants to see. He wants to see the removal of all Palestinians from Gaza and some sort of real estate development project that he can participate in going forward. And, like I said, the only The only really outstanding question in terms of him is how committed he is to that and whether that's something that he can actually effectuate.
It just, I mean, we talked about this when he announced his first plans for Mara Gaza or whatever, it's being dubbed, that it's a recipe for complete and total disaster, like on top of the ethical considerations of what it would entail. You're also just going to end up worsening the radical rage at U.S. imperialism, Western imperialism for like the entire situation. People have fought for decades, literally for the land. And we don't even have to get into this, but it's so obviously just a recipe for an even more explosive situation because people are not going to stop fighting for the land. And it doesn't just affect Palestine. It doesn't just affect people in the area. I mean, it's other groups spread throughout the entire region react to what happens in Gaza, just to the infamous Osama bin Laden letter. What does it cite? Well, it talks about Palestine.
That's right.
It's not some small issue for a lot of America's adversaries. So it's just, even on its own terms, a ridiculous idea that they seem to actually genuinely be pushing closer and closer to making the goal at the end stage of negotiations.
So increasingly inside of Israel, there are protests that are not just about retrieving the hostages, securing a ceasefire to get the hostages back. They're starting to actually talk about Palestinians and the suffering of Palestinians. Now, I'm under no illusion, based on the polling, that this is anything approaching majority coalition in Israel. But this is really the first time we've seen any of that messaging at all, any concern for the lives of Palestinians being expressed in the protest movements that have been ongoing. So we can put these images up on the screen. You had a group of, I believe it's several hundred Israelis who marched towards the border with Gaza. Some of them are holding signs that said Palestinian lives matter, which again is just not something that we've seen in Israel. I mean, it's the sort of thing you could be, censored for, arrested for. You can see one of those Palestinian lives matter signs there. And you had even an attempt to, directly approach that border fencing, which was rebuffed by the Israeli police there. But Emily, it is significant to me that even within Israel, and we've seen this, Shaul Ben Ephraim, who we've had on the show, is a liberal Zionist, who completely changed his mind about, he says, okay, you know what, the left was right. This is a genocide and this is horrific. Now, he's still committed to the state of Israel. But, I think he's one example of how some liberal Israelis have woken up to the horrors of the slaughter that is being committed in their names. And so in any case, even though it's a small number, I do think it's noteworthy that there's a caring concern for Palestinians here that I haven't seen evident in any of the protests up to this point.
I think it's very significant. And I think some of it also has to do with the fact that it's more obvious now than ever before that this idea that the war and all of the destruction and death that it's wrought is not going to result in the end of Hamas. And
right.
I think that just sort of makes everything, it makes clear what all of this was ultimately for and what it was actually going to end in. So it's not a surprising development at all, but I have to imagine that some of it stems from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Some of these things just have become undeniable at this point. One of those protesters actually spoke out about what his goals were and why he was there. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
While our government, the Israeli government, launches another attack on Gaza, we are marching hundreds of people, Jews and Palestinians, from Sderot to the Gaza border with a demand to stop this assault on Gaza, to stop the horrible killing of innocent people and of children. And we are demanding our government to sign a deal, to a ceasefire and a hostage deal. We are here to say very, very clearly, the Israeli public do not support this government. This war cannot go on. This war has nothing with our safety. It's only about annexation and building more settlements and transferring the Palestinians, and we would not let it happen.
So he says what you were indicating there, like at this point, it's undeniable. This war is just about annexation and settlements and transferring the Palestinians, as he says, effectively ethnic cleansing. So that's where things stand this morning in terms of Israel.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.